COVID-19 has had such a strong impact on our bodies, our brains, our energy levels, our society. Go anywhere now, the grocery store, a family barbecue, the post office, even your best friend's house. You're going to find out that this pandemic also had a profound and sometimes painful impact on our friendships, family dynamics. Actually, anytime human meets human. What do we disagree on? The threat of COVID-19, the steps necessary to stay safe, whether or not we should be required to wear masks, even on planes or in the post office. I was on a shuttle bus at the airport, and out of nowhere, the shuttle bus driver started telling me how different life is.
It's totally different.
How mean people suddenly are on the shuttle to each other.
Nobody gets home. And it's all about me factor. Nobody else matters no more.
People we've known for years suddenly disagree with us on so many things. And inside, we all just want people to think like us. And all the political rifts before the pandemic, they just got deeper. You may be rushing for the vaccine, but your cousin or even my own brother wasn't sure he should have one. So Dr. Carey Krause is a psychiatrist with Mercy Health. And Doc, the question of how to get along is one we're all grappling with. It's something as a psychiatrist I'm sure you deal with a lot. Every conversation now in a crowd, around a campfire, in the grocery line, it seems like it can get heated. People get angry, sometimes even mean. What's the best response?
When you think about conversations, there can be two different things that you're trying to accomplish. One is to try to make sure everybody else hears your point of view, which is usually what people are doing. I think it's probably more successful to say, I would rather listen and see if I can understand somebody else's point of view. I think we do that more often when we're with a group of people that we know very well, with our family or with our tribe, but that has gotten out of control. We have all of these ways that we believe we can communicate with people now. We've got social media and all these different things. And so I think all of us feel like we're out there to convince everybody else that our point of view is the right point of view. And if you're trying to do that, you can be sure that the person you're talking to is not really listening to you. They're just waiting for their opportunity to do the same thing for you. And I think we go a lot further if we would just stop and say, why don't I try to listen to you and see what you're trying to say to me?
I had an incident today on an airplane where the guy next to me didn't have his mask on. He had it like this.
Right.
How should I have approached that situation? I just asked, basically said, can you put your mask on? And he said, I do have my mask on. I said, can you put it over your nose? And basically he was saying no.
Well, and I think that there's a limit to what we can do in those circumstances. You know, obviously you can try to push the situation. You can ask the flight attendants to help you with that. And that might be the right thing to do, but of course, then it'll cease to be a pleasant conversation and it'll turn into some type of confrontation. I think we all have to decide when is appropriate for confrontation. Not all the time, though, are confrontations appropriate. I think sometimes it's just a matter of trying to keep the conversation as civil as possible. And I also think we have a tendency to want to convince the world that we're right. You know, just pulling back and one person at a time is good enough. If we manage to listen to our friends and our family and get their point of view, we're probably doing as much as we really need to do.
So when it comes to my best friend or even my brother who wasn't sure he wanted to be vaccinated, before entering that tough conversation with my BFF, with my brother, what are the questions I should ask myself?
Ask yourself how much you really know about things. Be careful that you're not trying to push an expert narrative if you're not the expert. We all have a tendency to do that. We all get to the point where we believe that our viewpoint is correct and we will base it on different expert opinions that we've had about things, but I think we can do that a bit too much. And I think it's probably better to think in terms of what do you want out of the conversation as opposed to what do you want him to get out of the conversation? What will make you feel satisfied? Because you're not going to have any ability to make him believe or think in a certain way. And if your satisfaction is based on his response, then you're always going to be potentially in a place where you don't feel like you have any control over that.
Now, what if I know going into the conversation, I'm really angry, or I know they're really angry, but I want to get through the conflict or at least find some sort of common ground? What's the best approach?
I would strongly recommend that you or someone who felt like they were angry take a moment to think about what was making you angry. Anger is usually a sign of frustration. And why are you feeling frustrated? Again, is it because you can't get somebody else to take your point of view? And if that's the only thing that's going to make your frustration feel better, you may be frustrated for a long time. Think in terms of, what am I going to be okay with that I can control, and how do I control that part of my life? And that, I think, will lead to less frustration and then less anger.
I understand that I shouldn't say, this is what I think, this is what you should think. I get that. But what should I keep foremost in my mind during the conversation to get through it as best I can?
It's certainly okay for you to be thinking, this is what I think, as long as you don't necessarily feel like you have to convince the other individual. Foremost in your mind ought to be, what's the conversation really about? A conversation with your brother, what it's really about is you want to tell him that you love him, that you want the best for him, and you want him to know that whatever you can do for him is what you want him to know about. He may not be willing to accept your lecture, so to speak, or what you have to say about the particular virus. And so I think the listening conversation is, what is it that I can do to help you with this? Is there something I can do to help you understand where I'm coming from?
Think about the other person.
Absolutely.
So am I just trying to convince them, or am I trying to fix them? That's a good thing to also remember.
Right. And you're not trying to do either.
How important is empathy, and how do we cultivate empathy?
It is an essential part of who we are as human beings. And for that reason, I think we all have it. I think the real the way you phrase it there in terms of cultivating it is probably the way to think about it. And I think that can be a conscious thing to put in your mind when you have a conversation. Am I thinking about what might be best for this individual? I think that then changes the way you approach a lot of conversations. It becomes less about, I've got to convince them, and more about, what is it that they need, and maybe I can provide that for them.
Now, I know I can't make somebody else be more open-minded. How can I make myself be more open-minded?
I think the very first thing is to remember that not everything that you accept as true and factual may in fact be that way. Always be willing to examine your beliefs, challenge them a little bit if there's information that comes along that seems to be challenging. It's very easy to just say, I'm not going to read that, I'm not going to listen to that, and move on. But if you're willing to say, let me stop and read this and see if I can see the other point of view, then that'll go a long way towards being able to challenge and refine your own beliefs.
Is it really that easy, though, to listen and hear them without agreeing?
It is not. It is a life's work.
And how do you find compromise?
Well, that's a very good question. By listening, I think, again, would be the answer to that. One of the techniques that we use in psychiatry, listening to patients, is to say, let me rephrase what I think you have said to me. Let me say this back to you, and you tell me whether this sounds correct or not. And then that's a way to identify where somebody's at, allow them to correct where they might be, and it sort of soothes the conversation, calms it down, and allows them to do the same thing then. Ask them if they're willing to rephrase what you're trying to say. And I think that's a road to compromise.
If I were to ask you, doctor, what are the ground rules for these difficult conversations? One of them obviously would be to listen. What would some of the other ground rules be?
Say, keep your focus on the individuals you're trying to work with fairly small. It needs to be those people who are most important to you. Most of us are not in a position to be influencers of the wider world. I guess some people are, but in just a one-to-one conversation, I think we try to keep it to a small group. Don't feel like you have an obligation or a responsibility to change the mind of the rest of the world.
And while you're doing that, the best way to communicate?
Remain calm, try to listen to what the other person is saying, try to see if you understand it. As you were saying, what's a way to challenge your own beliefs or to refine your own beliefs? If you can listen to what somebody else has to say and see if those things are challenging to your own beliefs and understand why. Even the pause that it takes to do that, I think actually helps a conversation move along.
At what point do you know you should definitely be avoiding this subject?
I think when somebody looks like they're very angry, if they're not willing to say a whole lot, they don't come forth with much, maybe say just one or two words. Definitely, if they're not making eye contact or doing some of those basic unspoken social interaction things that we all are used to seeing, I think that's your clue that this is not an area they want to go to.
And for the person listening who might feel like me, where these riffs here, there, and everywhere are really starting to hurt, what is your recommendation?
I would once again go back to those people that you trust and you love the most and look for those supports. Look for the supports with the people that are important to you. Again, as a species, we are created for that small group of individuals. This world that we live in right now has created what I think is a somewhat artificial construct that we feel like we're part of this much larger world and that somehow we're obligated to influence that. I would spend most of your time with your family and with your close friends, continuing to grow those relationships. And that's where I think you'll find the things that will help repair that sense of rift that people are experiencing.
I just heard a comedian say, social media has showed us that the world can come together, and they will learn that they shouldn't come together.
Well, sometimes I refer to it as anti-social media, because it removes that face-to-face interaction we have. It allows you to say everything on your mind without that actual connection that we have, and that's not a good place to be. I think we need that face-to-face communication to keep ourselves in a civil place.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, I think you've said to, number one, be willing to listen. Number two, be willing to compromise, be willing to disagree, and just try to understand where the other person is coming from.
Yes, and I would say don't bite off more than you need to bite off in these difficult times.
Dr. Carey Krause, thanks for talking today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And I hope as people venture into the world that this was helpful. Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you.